Gospel today, Jesus says at the end that every scribe who has been instructed in the kingdom of heaven brings from his storeroom both the new and the old. A question that I get when I'm coming into new places or meeting people for the first time, it might not be asked outright, but it's certainly under the surface. And that question is, are you one of those conservative priests? And so a couple of comments about that as you're getting to know me and I'm getting to know you. I want to just sort of allay any fears that might be there. Two comments, first of all, from St. John Paul II. He said that we use sometimes words liberal, conservative, so on and so forth, a lot of times ripped from our political realm in the Catholic Church as well. But John Paul II noted that really there are two types of Catholics. He said that the first group is the Orthodox, and that sounds intimidating or whatever, but Orthodox means right teaching. So the Orthodox, anybody who is an Orthodox Catholic, is a person who thinks that the Church teaches the truth, that the Holy Spirit is guiding the Church and that the Church is teaching the truth and so on and so forth. And then St. John Paul II said there are those who are unorthodox, who call themselves Catholic, consider themselves to be Catholic, but don't think that the Church, at least in some instances, teaches the truth. And so thus, it doesn't really teach the truth at all. Now, St. John Paul II said then within the realm of Orthodox Catholicism, there is tension, and that's okay, and that there's room for disagreement or room for varying opinions on how to achieve and help everyone reach salvation. And that tension basically is involved in what Jesus is talking about in tonight's gospel. How much old stuff to use and how much new stuff to use. Both of those, of course, in quotes, right? How much old stuff do we use? How much of the tradition of the church, how much of the past of our church, how much of the past of our faith, of our fathers do we utilize today? And how and in what ways is God and the Church inviting us, the Holy Spirit inviting us to be a new presence, a new unfolding, a new mystery? And so that tension is there. And John Paul II talked about that, and I think we all sense that. We know what we mean when we say that. Now, I think it's important to say that a lot of priests today, my age, 10 years, ordained in the last 10 years, or whatever, somewhere in that realm, within the realm of orthodoxy, so in that group that believes that the Church is teaching the truth, I think a lot of guys that have been ordained in the last 10 years as priests would probably skew towards clinging to the tradition of the Church. Now, another comment about that, there's one of two reasons that has happened. Either A, we all met somewhere in secret and planned that and decided that we were going to do this together, and we all met and made it happen in secret. Or, and I can promise you that that's not the case, or it's coming from something that our generation has noticed and has caused that. There's a reaction and or an action and a reaction. And I would suggest, or I would like to say, that I think a lot of the reason that guys that have been ordained in the last 10 years or so would skew towards the tradition of the Church, that comes out of the fact that I think most of us have seen and come out of an era where a lot of times it was preached or practiced that the old should basically be burned down and abandoned. Now, we also, as we were talking last weekend, in the midst of that, watched a lot of our friends leave the church. We watched them walk away because basically, for a long time, in either outright or in the way that the faith was practiced, our generation was sort of told that nothing really matters here. Or basically what we're doing is nice and if it makes you feel good, but there's nothing really of substance here. There's nothing in which one would lay down one's life for. There's nothing that really ultimately at the end of the day matters. And so an example of this would be that I went to 5 years of Catholic grade school, 4 years of Catholic high school, And in those 4 years of Catholic high school, we had Mass at least once a month. I never saw anyone come forward but not receive communion. Now, it's a teaching of our church that if we are in a state of mortal sin, we're not supposed to receive communion. So either none of my compadres at Roncalli High School, either they all went to Mass every Sunday and were not in any state of mortal sin, or they didn't really know that key teaching of the church. Another example would be like the confirmation prep that we received. It was like a year long, it was mandatory, but really we just sat around and watched videos of Jesus prancing through fields of wheat and didn't really get any content. And at the end of that, one would walk away thinking that basically our Catholic faith doesn't really matter. And so again, a lot of us have come up through that, and we've seen our friends and our family members leave because of that. And so at the same time, I want to say that I think I recognize that those who would disagree with that, those who maybe would come from the other side of that, things from the past, it wasn't as great as we always imagined, I recognize and I respect that. I talk to my parents a lot. They grew up right around the era of Vatican II, a little bit before and obviously some after. They talk about getting ready to go to confession when they were in grade school, and they'd stand in line in 3rd or 4th grade, and they'd listen to, a lot of times, their friends getting yelled at in the confessional. They talk about going to Mass and not being able to understand anything and not having any idea what was going on. And so I totally get and I totally respect the people that would come out of that and say, you know what, maybe we should burn a lot of that down. Maybe we should get rid of some of those things. And so I recognize and I respect and I value the other side of that. And I think that it's important to, again, listen to Jesus in the gospel tonight. Every scribe who has been instructed in the kingdom of heaven, and that's all of us, we've all been instructed in the kingdom of heaven, brings from his storeroom both the new and the old. So there's a tension in our church, and that's okay. That's okay. What we see is if we skew too far to one side or too far to the other, what we quickly end up in very fast is heresy, unorthodox, those who believe that the church is not teaching the truth anymore. And I'd like to take that from both sides. I'd like to look at people who fall off the wagon on either side. So first of all, those who would say that we should only be doing the things that are old, and that there's nothing new, and that the Holy Spirit is not doing anything new in our midst and in our church. You would start out, typically people, and I know them. I hear from them, and I receive emails from them. And they will start out by saying that the Latin Mass is better than what we do here in English, the new Mass. But then, very quickly that turns into, this Mass isn't even valid. And then that turns into, the current Pope isn't the real Pope. And then that turns into, we shouldn't go back to the 1962 Missal, we should go back to the Missal from 1955. And then we should go back even further and further. And then that gets very quickly to people saying that the church isn't getting old fast enough. And so then that becomes the final step. I'm going to start my own church. Now, the people that fall off the wagon on the other side, those who would say we should only be doing new things and that everything from the past is bad and evil and should be burned down. They will start out by saying, hey, Vatican II changed everything, and everything before 1962 was bad and a failure and evil. And they'll say that the church at Vatican II changed its teaching on key issues. And then they start to say that, don't worry, the church will continue to change its teachings on key issues. And then the church isn't changing its teachings fast enough. And then, just like the people on the other side, I'm going to start my own church. And I think one thing that we notice from both sides, the people that fall off, or I should say I've noticed, and something that lets us know as well, I think, if we've not fallen off the wagon, people who fall off the wagon very quickly, I think, resort to anger. And I've experienced that from people who've fallen off on both sides. Anger. Jesus says, every scribe who has been instructed in the kingdom of heaven brings from his storeroom both the new and the old. So in this tension that exists in our Catholic Church, which is healthy and okay, who helps us decide what to keep of the old and in what ways we're called to be new? And the answer is very simple. It's the same answer that the apostles talked about in the New Testament. It's the church, guided by the Holy Spirit. We have to ask ourselves, are we living in the heart of the church? And do we trust that the church is teaching the truth? And do we trust that in the ways that the church is calling us to be new? And so an example of this would be the Mass, the celebration of the Mass. If this becomes my personal liturgical experiment or yours, then we're out of bounds. As Archbishop Tobin is begging priests, please celebrate the Mass as it is laid out in the Roman Missal. If I do that, then I don't have to worry at night about me trying to do my own thing or become a new church or my own church. I'm living in the church. That's just one example. And so I would admit at the end that you've caught me. I'm a conservative priest. But I know as well that not everyone thinks like me, and I know that that's okay, and that we all come from different places and different experiences, and I believe that as long as we're motivated by love, and as long as we're motivated to help the poor in our community, and as long as we're motivated to evangelize and bring the gospel to people, and as long as we think that the people that aren't here should be here, and as long as we're working to try to help that happen, and as long as we want to bring people to Jesus and His church, then we'll be fine. It's witnesses, as we said last week, who show us what it is like to live in the heart of the church, to not fall off the wagon on either side. And so I'd end with a couple of questions for reflection. Is your life lived in the heart of the church? Or do you want to burn down the new and burn down the old? Are you seeking the truth, unworried about where it will lead you, unconcerned about what of the new and what of the old the Holy Spirit will keep? May we be a community of people seeking to live and move and have our being in the heart of the church, okay with healthy tension, knowing that if we are living in the heart of the church, we will never, as individuals or as a parish, go wrong.